Usually, the person who wrote the music is the only one that listens to the entire song from the initial concept they had. For decades, members of Queen's crew held a troubling secret. Backstage, they witnessed John Deacon's startling behavior that, if it had ever been revealed, would have destroyed careers. When the Quiet One performed live, even Freddie Mercury was taken aback. It wasn't the worst part, though. Deacon was drinking excessively and exhibiting symptoms of a total mental collapse by 1991. Freddie's illness wasn't the only reason the band was disintegrating. At the age of 73, Deacon has finally disclosed what ultimately pushed him over the edge, and the reason he has been keeping the truth for so long. A heartbreak that would silently haunt John Richard Deacon for years marked the beginning of his existence. He was born in Leicester, England, on August 19, 1951, and lost his father when he was still a young boy. In post-war Britain, where money was scarce and every day presented a new struggle, his mother Molly was abruptly forced to raise John and his sister Julie alone. John learned the value of responsibility during those formative years, long before most kids do. John had to remain grounded, which gave him a maturity that would later set him apart from other boys his age, who could only dream. Over time, that steady, peaceful disposition became his greatest strength and his shield. But beneath the calm facade lay a mind that appeared destined for creativity. John studied electronic engineering at Chelsea College in London, with an intensity that astounded his instructors. In 1971, he graduated with first-class honors, something that very few people ever do. Major corporations began to give him jobs, after his instructors thought he had the aptitude to transform contemporary technology. He would have been paid significantly more for one research position at MARD than the majority of musicians were in those years. Even as a student, he was creating sound systems and circuits that astounded experts. If he had made a different decision, he might have changed the world of technology rather than music. For John, however, the allure of music was too great to resist. Years before, at the age of 14, that attraction had already manifested itself. He founded the band The Opposition with several of his school pals. Local clubs wanted to pay them to perform because they were eager to establish themselves, and the group soon began making more money than most teens could imagine. However, John's cautious and protective mother forbade him from performing in late-night settings. She didn't want her son to stray into smoky clubs full of strangers. She wanted him safe and focused on his studies. Thus, John managed to get around her regulations. He slipped off to rehearsals and told her he was studying at a friend's place. The only way he could continue to pursue the music he loved was to take the risk. Even while the opposition remained minor, John learned how to exist in two worlds at once, from the secret delight of juggling his own enthusiasm with his mother's expectations, a skill that would later be crucial in Queen. A modest homemade invention rather than a performance was the true turning moment. John constructed a small amplifier for less than £8, using leftover parts from his college lab and an old television speaker. Although it didn't appear to be much, the sound that Brian May produced when he plugged his guitar into it was completely different from anything they had ever heard. No commercial amplifier could produce the warmth, richness, and vitality that this one could. It set the mood for some of Queen's most well-known songs. That small device, later known as the DC amp, became indispensable. It is still in use by Brian May over 50 years later. Despite decades of study, no engineer has been able to replicate its enchantment. The world would never forget Queen's sound because of that quiet, pragmatic bassist. Yet few fans are aware of it. John, however, hardly ever joined Queen. He wasn't impressed when he first saw them perform. He even formed his own band, concentrating on more technical music that better suited his abilities, because he felt their style was a little too much. It appeared for a time that he would follow that course. However, John grudgingly consented to try out for Queen after his guitarist left for another chance. He played a steady bass line at Imperial College London on February 20, 1971, spoke very little, and walked out without a hitch. He wasn't ostentatious. He was not an attention seeker. And that was just what they needed in a band with so many well-known members. His silence was his secret weapon from the beginning. John merely backed the music, while other bassists had attempted to stand out and clashed with Freddie Mercury's vision. He remained silent in the studio until he had something important to say. The band paid attention when he did. He had no desire to be the center of attention. His interest was in improving the music. John silently kept things together, while Freddie, Brian, and Roger were able to shine, because to that balance. Not everything was simple. Management persuaded him to take the name Deacon John for Queen's debut album, saying it sounded more like a blues legend. John was shaken to read it in print, because it felt phony to him. Later, he insisted on having his true name returned and refused to allow anyone to choose for him ever again. He made every effort to stay away from the gimmicks and ploys of the music industry after that. The majority of fans were unaware of John's versatility beyond his bass. He learned to play instruments surprisingly quickly and was able to play the piano, guitar, and even double bass. In songs like Crazy Little Thing Called Love, he subtly incorporated rhythm guitar elements. Additionally, he introduced Queen to a funk rhythm in another one, Bites the Dust, which went on to become one of their greatest hits. In 1971, John Deacon met Veronica Tetzlaff in a dance while still a teenager. At the time, Veronica was a nanny at a teacher training college, and Queen was just getting started and not very well known. During the band's early years, when finances were tight and life was uncertain, the two fell in love fast and remained together. They dated for 4 years, before being married in a modest ceremony in January 1975. John penned, "You're my best friend" as an homage to her, and their relationship ended up being one of the most enduring in rock music. The song helped define Queen's breakthrough and became an enormous smash. Despite being married to one of the most well-known bassists in the world, Veronica has avoided the spotlight and maintained a modest profile for almost 50 years. At about the same period, Queen almost collapsed. The band was barely making enough money to survive, despite hits like Killer Queen on the charts. John was having a hard time providing for his new wife. Freddie Mercury lived in a wet flat, and Brian May rented a tiny bedsit. John was abruptly denied a $4,000 advance to purchase a home from Queen's management firm. He became aware of how poorly the band was being handled after that rejection. Even though they were successful, their bosses kept the earnings while they only received $60 a week. John was forced to investigate the band's finances as a result of the rejection, and following a protracted legal struggle, Queen resigned from their management as a result of what he found. Although buying out their contract came at a high cost, it allowed them to take charge of their careers. Queen might not have made it through without that moment. John accomplished something nearly unheard of amidst the pandemonium that comes with being a member of a rock band. Together, he and Veronica brought up 6 kids while separating their private lives from the hectic world of celebrity. John kept things calm and collected, in contrast to Roger Taylor's penchant for the fast life and Freddie Mercury's lavish parties. Veronica developed strong bonds with the other band members' partners, and their Putney house turned into a haven. John made sure his family was shielded from the spotlight, even during the busiest touring years. None of his children have mentioned their father in public to yet, evidence of his meticulous protection of their privacy. When John was found drinking in 1985, fans were taken aback. Known as Queen's most composed member, he was detained in the West End of London after failing a breathalyzer test, after leaving a Phil Collins show. Following the band's enormous success in Rio, he recently purchased a Porsche, a flamboyant departure from his typical low-key vehicles. He lost his license for a year as a result of the arrest, and he was forced to use the London Tube without anyone recognizing him. On the radio, Brian May even made a joke by dedicating Stevie Wonder's song, "Don't Drive Drunk" to him. John quickly sold the Porsche out of embarrassment and went back to making more sensible decisions. The fact that it was so unlike him made the incident stand out. John was refreshingly candid in interviews about his views on his roles as a father and a musician. When asked about having children in a 1981 interview in Japan, he acknowledged that he felt a great deal of responsibility and that he wanted life to be as uncomplicated and straightforward as possible. He already had 3 small children at the time, and it was clear from his statements that his family came first. John viewed music as a source of stability, while his bandmates frequently embraced the wild side of fame. After the band's early management issues, he also took on the role of unofficial financial consultant, closely monitoring their commercial dealings. His choice to leave the music industry following the passing of Freddie Mercury was greatly influenced by this sense of duty, deciding against staying in the spotlight and instead to live a tranquil life with his family. John's path as a songwriter started in a unique manner. When Sheer Heart Attack was being recorded in 1974, Brian May was admitted to the hospital due to hepatitis. John filled in, writing a song called Misfire that contrasted with the band's typical hard rock style by adding a hint of the Caribbean. Most of the guitar parts were played by him, which was something he had never done before. In addition to writing it, the song began Jay's development as a songwriter and gave Queen a new depth. He would write the song that made Queen a household name in America 6 years later. Chic's funk sound served as the inspiration for another song, Bites the Dust, which spent 3 weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100 thanks to its bass line. It rose to the top of the R&B and disco charts in addition to the rock charts, becoming a huge crossover hit. The single became Queen's best-selling tune and sold millions of copies. Even more amazing was the fact that the plan never called for its success. By taking that chance, the band was able to reach a completely new audience. Many were unaware that John was also the band's covert connection to Motown and pop. John took inspiration from musicians like Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder, while Brian and Roger tended toward rock and Freddie added theatrical flair. In contrast to Queen's more dramatic material, his songs frequently exuded warmth and accessibility. This influence was reflected in timeless songs like You're My Best Friend and I Want to Break Free. Later, critics pointed out that his songs frequently held up better over time than some of Queen's more ostentatious hits, providing the band with a steady supply of popular appeal. John was much more than just a bassist. On a number of records, he contributed layers that his fans were unaware were his by playing keyboards, piano, and guitar. Using electronic equipment leftovers, he constructed the renowned DC amp, which Brian May used to produce the distinctive guitar tones that typified Queen's sound. John, however, was the most adaptable and quietest member of the group, because he was the only one who never provided background vocals. His most significant contribution was probably behind the scenes. John was in charge of Queen's financial choices after they broke away from their previous management. He managed contracts, monitored spending, and ensured the band's funds were safe. He was fully trusted by the others, and Queen became one of the most successful bands in the world, because to his meticulous planning. John Deacon was viewed by most as Queen's calm, reserved bassist. However, even the crew was occasionally taken aback by his actions behind the scenes. He gained notoriety during the band's live performances in the 1970s and early 1980s for an odd antics that were never discussed by anyone outside the inner group. Members of the crew remembered a crazy gesture he would make on stage during some songs, which they nicknamed his ball flashing trick. Once, after they made the decision to forego inflatable props in Italy, Freddie Mercury even gave him encouragement. The story, which was privately shared among the band's employees, revealed that Queen's reserved demeanor was in conflict with his rebellious side. Outside of the theater, Deacon bore a burden that became impossible to conceal. At the age of 24, he was handling Queen's business affairs and providing for 6 children. Playing bass wasn't the only thing involved. It was his responsibility to ensure that the band's future was safe and that the money was handled. He felt the weight of that responsibility, particularly when Freddie Mercury's health deteriorated and commercial pressure increased in the 1980s. By 1991, according to former coworkers, he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Mercury retreated nearly entirely from public life after his death later that year due to overwhelming stress and shame. His final recording session in 1997 felt like agony to him, and he was later described as vulnerable by Roger Taylor and Brian May. John had finally been broken by the burden that had once given him meaning. Long before Freddie died, there had been indications of the strain. He already appeared uneasy and worn out in interviews conducted in Japan in 1981 and 1982. One witness recalled a party in 1986 where Deacon discreetly went beneath the table after consuming too much alcohol before going back to his chair, indicating that he was drinking heavily by 1982. People could easily overlook the severity of the despair that was gradually taking hold of him because of his composed, almost bashful demeanor. As the years passed, so did his songwriting. Nothing was the same after Queen's 1989 release of The Miracle. For the first time, Queen was given sole credit for all of the songs instead of the individual members. Only 3 songs, The Miracle, Rain Must Fall, and My Baby Does Me, were co-written by Deacon and Freddie. His efforts were significantly less when Innuendo took over in 1991. The band's emphasis on radio-friendly music ran counter to his fastidious tendencies, and he discreetly stopped writing completely. He withdrew even in social situations. By the middle of the 1980s, he hardly ever participated in interviews or promotional appearances, allowing Roger, Freddie, and Brian to steal the show. Roger Taylor once acknowledged that for years they didn't hear anything from him. His withdrawal from the band's social life was so obvious that Taylor half-jokingly referred to him as a psychopath in 2007. Brian May later remarked, "I haven't heard a squeak from John." He clarified that Deacon still approved of them continuing to use the Queen's name, but his own health was also subtly deteriorating. Throughout the 1980s, he dealt with confidential medical matters that were never disclosed to the public. His wife, Veronica, became more concerned about the toll Queen's rigorous schedule was having on him. It was made worse by the strain of parenting 6 kids while traveling the world. The sadness that had plagued him grew worse as he resorted to drinking more, frequently leaving him too exhausted to handle the limelight. Deacon, a perfectionist by nature, found himself embroiled in an agonizing struggle. The industry was pushing Queen toward faster, more commercial content, but he wanted them to remain loyal to the sound they had created in the 1970s. He was continuously dissatisfied with the speed of recording, despite his obsession with the smallest aspects of sound quality. The disco and funk influences of Hot Space in 1982 marked a turning point in his career. He was unable to strike a compromise between his ideals and the band's survival needs. Furthermore, his innovation had all but stopped by the late 1980s. Then came the call that made all the difference. He found out on November 25, 1991, that Freddie Mercury had passed away the previous evening at the age of 45 from AIDS-related bronchial pneumonia. This was more than just Deacon losing a bandmate. He said that he couldn't stand the pressure to continue acting as though Freddie's legacy mattered, or the commercialization of it. Less than an hour passed throughout the meeting. He requested that his name be taken off of all future promotions, declined to discuss any upcoming projects, and rejected any plans for tours or products. He turned down tens of millions of pounds that day, shattering Queen's 4-piece status that had existed since 1971. He disappeared from the stage. Although he never completely left Queen's business, Deacon maintained a significant influence over the choices that molded the band's history through attorneys and reliable management. He had the power to decide whether documentaries, musicals, or movies might proceed. In fact, the 2018 release of Bohemian Rhapsody required his consent. Although he never had direct contact with Taylor or May, the business structure guaranteed him a fortune that subtly increased to hundreds of millions of dollars, while keeping him as an invisible partner. Promoters have presented him with incredible offers over the years. He declined invitations to the Olympic Games and big tribute concerts, a chance to perform at Live 8 for £12 million, and a £25 million guarantee for a single Rock and Roll Hall of Fame presentation. He consistently responded with silence. Freddie could not be brought back, not even by charity activities dedicated to his memory. The message became evident to those who persisted in asking. His career as a musician was permanently ended. Instead, he decided to live a new kind of life. He made the decision to give up everything and concentrate on being a father in 1997, when his youngest son was just 8 years old. He traded in his mansion for a simple home in Putney, where his neighbors knew him only as John, and he moved his family into a cozy but unpretentious home. He attended parent meetings, football games, and school plays, the kinds of regular events he had missed when Queen was on tour. His 6 kids were raised away from the spotlight, and none of them are associated with music in the public eye now. He has a grandson. According to those close to him, he now finds the most delight during family get-togethers, where he occasionally sits at the piano, but never plays the hits that made him famous. His Putney house became into a stronghold. It appeared normal to onlookers, but inside it was his barrier against the outside world. He picked up newspapers, spoke pleasantly to anyone who knew him, and then retreated into a life that kept him invisible, just like any other neighbor. It was a successful tactic. He has remained incredibly affluent and utterly private for almost 30 years. On the other hand, his influence persisted behind the scenes. His signature was necessary when Queen sold their repertoire to Sony Music in 2024 for over $1 billion. The royalties from the songs he created, particularly Another One Bites the Dust, You're My Best Friend, and I Want to Break Free, continue to bring in millions of dollars annually. And he still co-owns Queen Productions. History has shown that Michael Jackson was correct when he originally urged Freddie to release Another One Bites the Dust as a single. Generations of musicians were influenced by one song alone, which changed rock music with its funk-inspired beat. Brian May has frequently expressed his admiration for Deacon's decision. He acknowledges that John probably wouldn't want to deal with the pressures of the industry today because it has changed so dramatically. According to May, Deacon made the choice to safeguard his own mental health following Freddie's passing, rather than to leave the band. He couldn't imagine Queen without him because of that loss. According to psychologists, he might have developed a type of grief-related performance anxiety that made taking a step back not only an option, but also a need. John Deacon is thought to be worth over £130 million now. He does not, however, have the accoutrements of typical rock stars. No yachts, no headlines, no mansions dotted the world. His life has been characterized by his decision to remain silent almost 30 years ago, not by his level of popularity. That quiet has turned into his statement, demonstrating that leaving and never turning back can occasionally be the most audacious thing to do.